Hello and welcome to Doc Talk, the educational and informational conversation series. I am Jayashree Mani, clinical nutritionist at PERQUE Integrative Health. I have Dr. Russell Jaffe here, owner and founder of PERQUE Integrative Health. This is where the LRA by LISAC testing, gold standard in delayed allergy testing, and PERQUE nutraceuticals come together. Dr. Russell Jaffe is in conversation today with Dr. Bill Harris. Welcome, Dr. Harris.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Same here. It's an honor to have you join us. Dr. Harris is an internationally recognized expert on omega-3 fatty acids and their role in heart disease, and has pioneered the omega-3 index testing. He has more than 300 publications in the medical literature relating to this topic, and he has also been an author on 2 American Heart Association scientific statements on fatty acids. Dr. Harris is a professor in the Stanford School of Medicine at the University of South Dakota, and president and CEO of Omega Quant, the home of the omega-3 index test. Dr. Russell Jaffe and Dr. Bill Harris.
But our audience, I think, is interested in, if you would, tell us what you're going to tell us. Tell us what's important for mere mortals and or health coaches and or professionals, health professionals, not techies.
Mm-hmm.
What's important about the omega-3 index, the Omega Quant test? Why did you develop it? Why have you stayed with it with, as Jayashree said, over 300 peer-reviewed publications and numerous investments of your time and thought and passion?
Right.
What are we going to learn over the next 45 minutes?
Well, I guess we'll learn how I first got interested in omega-3 back in the late 70s. Why I stuck with it, why the data kept dragging me along, how we came up with the omega-3 index, and roughly 17 years ago now, and what we've done with it since, and how we think what its future is going to look like. Good enough?
Place to start. Good place to start.
So I think to start at the beginning, because I got my PhD in nutrition in Minnesota, and I went on to do a postdoctoral fellowship with Dr. Bill Connor in Portland, Oregon. And Bill, this was 78, and Bill was one of the leaders in understanding the role of diet and dietary fat and saturated fat and polyunsaturated fat in controlling cholesterol levels. And we had known by that time pretty clearly that vegetable oils, liquid vegetable oils, would lower cholesterol in people, and that solid animal fats, butter, beef, tallow, etc., would raise cholesterol. We all knew that. What Bill had a clever thought, I see in hindsight, is, well, what about fish oil? Because fish oil is liquid, but it's from an animal. So is it the animalness that raises cholesterol, or is it the physical state, the liquid solid state question? So that was the question. He said, Bill, design a study. We're going to do a feeding study. We're going to test out salmon oil versus vegetable oil versus basically lard. And so we recruited, a bunch of 20-some healthy volunteers. We fed them for a month at a time. We fed them on the. Bill was a big guy for hitting with a big hammer to see if there's anything there. So we fed people about a cup, half a cup a day of salmon oil. They just drank it. Oh, it was 25 grams of EPA and DHA in hindsight.
Right.
And honestly, we didn't know much about DHA. I was not anyway, aware of the Dyersburg and Bang Eskimo studies.
Right.
They were just being published really starting in 71, finished in 78.
No, you were extending, if I may, the diet heart hypothesis of Fredrickson and Levy.
Exactly.
Under an exceptional mentor.
Yeah, Bill turned out to be, he was a great mentor and led me down the omega-3 path. And we found out that actually cholesterol was lowered by the salmon oil diet relative to the saturated fat diet, but it was the same with the vegetable oil diet. It didn't really do any different. The thing that the fish oil did that the salmon or that the vegetable oil didn't do was lower triglycerides. And that's when we first saw the triglyceride lowering effect. And there, unfortunately, there got to be a fair amount of press about the ability now of omega-3 to lower fish oils, to lower cholesterol. And that was used by a lot of supplement companies to say, take fish oil to lower your cholesterol, until more and more word came out that said, well, if you actually take fish oil pills, you don't lower your cholesterol.
Right.
And some people with certain lipid disorders, you actually can raise your cholesterol.
Right.
So that was a real slap in the face. It turned out that what the problem was that in our original studies, when you take away saturated fat from the diet, no matter what you put in, whether it's fish oil or vegetable oil, doesn't make a difference, you're going to lower cholesterol. It's a saturated fat actively raised it, taking it out, lowered it. So we sort of misunderstood our findings, or misinterpreted them, I think, a little bit. But anyway, that's how I got started. I was just interested for many years in how omega-3 would affect platelet function and triglyceride metabolism. And that really kept me going for 20 years until one scientific meeting in 2002. Well, two things. David Siskovic published in JAMA in the mid-1990s that a higher level of omega-3 was associated with reduced risk for sudden cardiac death.
Yes.
And that was it was kind of a cross-sectional study. It was not, I guess you say it's cross-sectional because in that study, they actually recruited people into the study who were having a heart attack at the moment. The paramedics were engaged to collect blood samples from people having a heart attack. And that's where Siskovic and all found that those who were having a higher omega-3 level were less likely to be having a heart attack. But it wasn't until 2002 when Christine Albert and part of the Physicians' Health Study showed that prospectively, if you measured omega-3 levels when someone was healthy and then followed them over time, you found the same thing, exactly the same relationship, that even after 17 years later, after doing an omega-3 test. So that's what turned the light bulb on for saying that omega-3 levels in the blood actually mean something. It's not just a marker of how much fish you eat, it's prognostic. And so that's when a colleague of mine, Dr. Clemens von Schacke in Munich, we were at this American Heart Association meeting in 2002, and this paper was reported, and we had a beer. We sat down and said, somebody's got to offer an omega-3 test. It means something. Doctors can use it. It's actionable. It predicts an important health outcome. So that was the birth of the omega-3 index. And I can continue.
Yes. Carry us along, because you've just given us a précis history of a globally accepted hypothesis, the diet heart hypothesis, that largely was not true. It ignored oxidized or damaged cholesterol and LDL. It ignored magnesium. And since you had time at Minnesota, did you cross paths at all with Ron Elleen?
No,
Ron was there about your time. He and I were at NIH together. He came out of Minnesota, student of Mildred Seelig. Magnesium protects fats in transit. And Ron and I continue to be colleagues in regard to magnesium and its potential.
Yeah.
You've whet our appetite. It's important to know the balance of both essential fats, omega-3 and omega-6. It's more important to know the active form of those fats. And I'm going to start with an anecdote. I was in Patty Doister's office. You were going over some research with Professor Doister at the Military Medical School. Right. You took out a lancet, you took a drop of blood, you reported back that my omega-3 index, my omega quant result, was 13%. And I look at the report, and the report says you have a goal you want more than 8%.
Right, right.
And so I called you up and I said, is 13 better than 8? And you said, well, 13 it's larger than 8.
Yes.
But you very honestly, and you have, I think, won the confidence of many of us in this functional, integrative, holistic, personalized medicine, evidence-based medicine community because of your integrity. If I remember, what you basically said was we don't have enough people with, over 12% to stratify. Now, I have continued to take my distilled fish oils, etc. And I think I mentioned that if anyone had a value, let me know.
Okay.
And you did. And you did. You have an excellent memory. So I want you to know that we're all indebted to you for developing the test, for giving us a window on a very complex issue.
Mhm.
Did you cross paths at all with Don Fry and Bob Maley in regard to these animal studies and impact on heart disease?
Bob Maley, yeah.
Okay, so Bob and Don and I collaborated. I was the one who showed that changes in platelet function, platelet aggregation, and platelet survival, and fibrinogen survival, predicted long before cardiovascular catastrophe that there was a repair deficit at the endothelial boundary.
Yeah, right. Critical.
And this was a time when most everybody at the Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, where Don was and Bob was at the time, accepted the notion of the Levy-Hart, diet-Hart hypothesis, except every time people change their lifestyle, they change their lipid profile.
Yeah, they did.
Which made it seem more epigenetic, lifestyle-driven, than genetic,
Right.
mom and dad. Okay, so now we have the test. It's been around long enough to know better. You have reported on the test. As a practitioner or as a consumer, as someone who wants to take safer fish oils and wants to know the Goldilocks scenario, not too much, not too little, just right. How do I know what is just right, either for me by category or personal? Is there a predictive personal test with a goal value that I want to have? And if I'm there, I can celebrate. And if I'm not, I should change my lifestyle to get there.
Right. Yeah, and it's a great question. I think as you mentioned, we came up back in 2004 when we first proposed the omega-3 index with a target of 8%. And that's just to define that. It's EPA plus DHA in red cell membranes. So as a percent of the total fatty acids in a red cell, and the red cell was chosen because it's a cell. It's an actual easy to access membrane, and it reflects many other tissues in the body, we now know. So 8% we came up with based on the evidence that was available to us at that time. And that has held up pretty well, I think. It's a level that's only about 2 to 3 or 4% of Americans are at, based on all of the studies we've done.
You mean based on diet alone or diet plus supplements?
Based on levels that you measure.
Okay, so this includes people who are taking supplements, including supplements of fish oil.
Right.
Okay,
but typically,
so I want to be in that minority.
Oh, I'm sure you are. You are definitely.
No, I am. I'm planning to stay here. I'm having a good time.
Right. 13% is, as we said, actually that's high for Japan. That's high for Korea.
Yes. No, I looked. I wasn't at all concerned because, sometimes it could be too much. But I looked and I saw that there are places where sea vegetables and or certain lifestyle and diet or certain other cultural patterns yield populations that have 10, 12 plus %.
Yeah.
And some of them seem quite spry.
I mean, to say the least. I mean, the Japanese are like the second longest living population on the planet. And they
And
have-
within Japan, the ones who live the longest are the ones who follow a traditional Japanese diet and lifestyle.
Right, right. And it's hard to pin all that on omega-3, right? There's a lot of factors there.
There's a lot.
So that's consistent with the idea, but it certainly doesn't prove it. If I can just segue a minute, in a couple days on the 22nd, we're going to publish a paper in Nature Communications that is the biggest study yet done looking at blood levels of omega-3 and risk for death from any cause.
Oh, great.
And so it's a longevity study, essentially.
Right.
And we have pooled data from about 45,000 people in 17 different cohorts or studies around the world. And we found that when you look at the highest omega-3 level, which would translate roughly 8, but it's a little bit, maybe 7.8, that area, versus the lowest omega-3, which is under 4%. If you look at that spread, you get about a 12 to 15% reduced risk for death So of course, if you wait long enough, everybody dies. I've learned that much, right? So it'll be 100% if you wait long enough. But if you look in a given window of time, you ask who dies and who doesn't. You are less, and these people are about in their 60s on average. If you look at so if you follow for the next 15 to 20 years, who dies, the people who have the highest omega-3 index are the least likely to die in that time. And this is quite a robust analysis. I think we had 15,000 deaths. So we had a large power. What was interesting is we looked at total mortality, but we also looked at cardiovascular cause, cancer cause, and then everything else, one big bucket of all other causes. And a higher omega-3 index was not just protective in the cardiovascular world. It was protective in cancer, not quite as strong a signal, but it was certainly there. And all other causes combined, the very same relationship as we saw in cardiovascular disease. It was a very stepwise reduction. Each step higher omega-3, lower risk for death. In the all-cause mortality, in the non-cardiovascular, non-cancer group. So
well, you just said something very important. It's like the duck should come down. All-cause morbidity, mortality, clinically available, accessible, not too invasive, not too expensive tests are rare. So you now have said that you have been intellectually curious enough and you have done the heavy lifting to look at this aggregation of studies and people and mortality, and indeed across boundaries, across major categories. It looks like it's an all-cause morbidity mortality test.
Yeah.
And those of us who are interested in epigenetics are interested in combining those kinds of tests, those that are all-cause morbidity mortality, especially if we have a functional measure, like more than 8% is the goal.
Right.
And while 4 is only a difference in algebra, a factor of 2 between 8, it is a world different in terms of risk factors. And my hunch, and I wonder if you would agree with this, if we put together all of the accessible, healthier choice, all-cause morbidity mortality factors, hemoglobin A1C, HSCRP, maybe include homocysteine, vitamin D, and a few others, including is your immune system attacking you or not, that we could develop a suite of tests, each gated to their best outcome value, not to some statistical range. Galen and Gambino did a fine job with Beyond Normality, roughly 1976.
Mm-hmm.
But that was fine for population studies. That did not tell us much about individuals.
It was tough,
and if
right?
I'm concerned about my risk of my heart attacking me, it's all about me at that moment. That's a Mel Brooks,
That's good. I like
homage. Right. And my impression is that the test you've developed, this omega-quant omega-3 index, is one of a small group that qualifies as all-cause morbidity and mortality. And I am following a model that says if you put together the tests that pass that very high bar and then gate them, interpret them based on their best outcome goal value, you can move people towards adding life to years and years to life.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and you're exactly right that it's not, I always want to say it's not just the omega-3s.
It's not just any one thing.
Not just any one thing.
Including it's not just mom.
Yes. But at least the omega-3 is well, and most of these, it's something you can do something about directly.
Yes.
You can directly control it. There's some of the other ones that are a little bit more difficult to manipulate. CRP, I mean, there's a lot of homocysteine. It's a multi-step down. There's a lot of metabolism between what you put in your mouth and what you measure in the blood.
That's right. So you're talking about an index that is a ratio, the sketch ratio of something in the red cell membrane,
right?
Which gives you time, for most people, gives you a certain average time.
Oh yeah.
Similarly, the analytic precision, whether you measure a plasma or a serum homocysteine, whether you measure it within 20 minutes of drawing the specimen, etc., can profoundly influence the outcomes for a variety of reasons that most professionals, even the silo of the laboratory people who know one side and the silo of the clinicians and health coaches who are urgently desirous of knowing that but don't. They don't, it's almost like two different worlds. If there was a Venn diagram, there would be very little overlap. Give us a sense, if you would, of the real world takeaway, one of the real world takeaways, which is also in relation to relative value, which also relates to cost, if you'd be so kind.
Yeah.
And it relates to, is this usual and customary? And if so, for whom?
Yeah.
Can you give us a sense of that?
Yeah. The risk benefit ratio, the risk is usually to the dollars expended for the test. And I know this test is just for the consumer on the website. It's $49.95. It's as you mentioned, a dried blood spot, a single spot. We send out a kit, you collect a spot, you mail it back in, we send you a report. It's going to be pretty standard stuff these days, and hopefully more in the future. So, what's the value of that? To me, it's hard to put a value on knowledge, although it certainly can guide you. And I mean, for someone like you, or because you are taking omega-3 supplements, there are some people who have high omega-3s in a sense naturally.
Yes,
their diet, they don't eat Jaffe.
We received a report from you that there was a teenager who was following his mom's very careful diet, but not with a lot of supplements, and he was up at 13. Yeah, but actually, when you got into the diet, there may likely have been a basis for this, and I think the point you're making is both wise and deserves to be emphasized in a very specific way. This test adds value, whereas many other tests of blood fats and lipids add cost.
Nice way of saying it.
I think that's a profound difference. And I've had a chance, because of my cardiovascular research background, to talk with people, including Don Berwick when he was running CMS for President Obama, and Elliot Fisher, who runs the Dartmouth Atlas brilliantly, Jack Wenberg's protege. And they agree that about 1/3 of what we currently invest in the cost of healthcare, or as Tom Harkin, the senator, used to call it sick care, about 1/3 of that is to increase the suffering, shorten the lifespan, increase the cost of mortality for about 1 million people a year. 500,000 from the consequences of diabetes and cardiovascular, 250,000 from nutritional deprivation, and 250,000 from the consequences of the healthcare system that is so fragmented that very often people and lives fall through the cracks, and the cost to society and, of course, to the family are enormous. It's rare for us to have the privilege of talking to someone who is still active and engaged and publishing imminently such an important confirmation study in an area where, when I have the privilege of talking about these subjects, I can tell you most of the faculty is eager to learn more. Most of the audience is eager to learn more and more. But of course, there are multiple threads if you're weaving a healthy life and lifestyle.
Right.
And one size does not fit all. Now, Barry Sears, on a program that we were on recently down in Sao Paulo a few years ago, he was recommending at that time 15 grams of EPA DHA a day. I recommend that people get tested and that you start with your diet. You start with a diet you can digest, assimilate, and eliminate without immune burden, etc.
Yeah, good.
If you're a stressed person today, and who isn't to some extent stressed today, you can, in saliva, measure stress hormones. You can even measure anabolic and catabolic hormones and complement the omega-3 or omega-quant test results with other assessments that might amplify or modulate, modify what you would do. If you have an autoimmune disease, I predict you have too much omega-6. And here I'm just paraphrasing the NHANES data that Artemis Simopoulos and you and others have looked at. We have a love affair with omega-6 fats, at least in the packaged goods, things that come in boxes and with ingredients, some of which don't look like food. So for me, it's been a makeover. Do you recommend that folks go back to a whole foods diet, getting most of their fats from seeds and nuts and whole foods? We, for example, and I'm going to challenge you on this one, we, for example, recommend minimal, if any, edible oils. We think once you separate the oil from the seed or the nut source, that air and oxygen become not your friend, they actually become your enemy. And that a lot of the omega-6 dominant foods have anti-rancidity additives to block your taste buds from sensing the sharpness of the rancidity, because the rancidity was there. Where, if anywhere, are you on the issue of edible oils in the diet? Are they good, bad, indifferent, and for whom?
Well, it's just, to be clear, edible oils that come from fish, I'm all in favor of.
All right, fair enough.
Yeah, obviously I prefer people to get their omega-3s from fish, natural sources, as you say. And the question of the omega-6s is, well, there's a question of edible oils. There's another question that's omega-6.
Yes.
Different questions, because I've been struck by the data that's similar to what I described in the paper we'll be publishing in a couple of days. 2 studies I've been in worldwide, multi-cohort, measuring blood levels of omega-6 and looking at cardiovascular disease outcomes, diabetes, who gets diabetes, who doesn't. And I've been struck that when we're looking at linoleic acid, the principal omega-6 in our diet, the higher the levels in these multi-cohort, multi-year follow-up studies, higher linoleic acids associated with less risk for diabetes and less risk for heart disease. So I've got to stand back and say, do I listen to the data or don't I? Do I? So that to me says the omega-6s are not the problem per se. There may be, as you allude to, other factors in processed oils that are a problem, and the omega-6 comes along with it. But I don't like the necessarily.
We should clarify. When we say edible oils, we are mostly talking about soybean oil, corn oil, somewhat peanut oil. Who else is in there?
Safflowers,
A little bit of
sunflowers.
safflower and sunflower, but not
Much,
that
no.
much. Not that
Soybean
much.
primarily, yeah,
Yeah,
soybean.
soybean and corn. And
Yeah.
they contain with them any fat soluble components, including modifications that come in from genetic modulation, that come in from glyphosate, which turns out to waste magnesium and oxidize fats. So there are more wrinkles to be well, first to be developed into a hypothesis and then brought into the world of data, prospective and retrospective, and let's see what we come up with. Because if I remember correctly, the American Heart Association, the American College of Cardiology, is currently fine with 10% of calories coming from omega-6.
5 to 10 is the usual recommendation. So
yeah, 5 to 10. But if you say 5 to 10, trust me, the packaged goods people will be 10 plus. It helps the crisp food, shipped foods, processed foods, production.
Yeah, it's true. Right.
Yeah.
Mouthfeel. Right.
Yes.
Yeah, and we're about. I think Americans are on average around 6%, 6 to 7% linoleic acid in the diet now.
Right.
With an omega-6, omega-3, that's one of my least favorite metrics, by the way. But it's just
yes. You see that
far too imprecise.
No, excuse me. I'm glad you raised that because we talk about what we measure. And I feel, and I think you do, whatever you're measuring, ask what it really means, because you can make a measurement with a meaning and you can make a measurement without a meaning. And very often we're making measurements and we're talking about the statistics and the precision of the measurement, but the meaning of the measurement is, shall I say, absent.
Well, yeah, vague anyway. Right. And I think that's my problem with the omega-6, omega-3 ratio, because it doesn't specify which fatty acids, which of the omega-3s are in it. They're all there.
There you go.
It doesn't specify which. I mean, there's 7 omega-6 fatty acids, at least in the blood, not in the diet. Sure. So which one are we talking about here? What's most important? And you can have high levels of omega-6 and omega-3 or low levels of omega-6 and have the same ratio.
Right, that's right. So it may be the balance, the ratio that's more important than an absolute number.
Well, or you might say the absolute number is more important. I mean, for me, the omega-3 index, what I like about it is it focuses on what I think is the main problem is the lack of EPA and DHA in American blood.
Right.
Because it measures that. And that's what you attack. You know what to do when you have a low omega-3, low EPA, DHA. You eat EPA and DHA or ALA if you are in certain situations. But if you have a bad ratio, well, there's 2 things you can do. You can lower your omega-6 and not increase your omega-3 at all. And to me, that is the worst thing to do, because that could theoretically correct your ratio, but it won't help you, because if you're not raising omega-3, then you're not really going to be doing that. I see a pop-up question about omega-7.
Yes.
Oh yeah, so that's a 16-1. It's called palmitoleic acid.
Right.
That's a new player. I mean, it's obviously been around for eternity, but it's new in the scientific interest. It's a complicated one, because when you give people 16-1 omega-7, you can have some interesting effects on their glycemic control in a sense. When you measure it in the blood, de novo, just in populations, it's associated with bad things. But when you give it to people, it can have good things. So we have a lot to learn about that. I'm not ready to make any pontifications about that one.
Thank you.
But I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
No, I agree with you. I think we need to step back, look functionally, look deeply at some of our cherished beliefs that have very limited evidence to support them, although there might be consensus. And with the help of technology, with the help of the moment, with the help of smarter systems and computers, find out what are the meaningful measures or indices. And my hunch is it'll be ratios in most cases. I think it will be interdependent. If you have enough magnesium, or if your cortisol to DHEA is in balance, or if your IgE to IgG4 is in balance, and on and on and on. And I do often find that it's about balance and ratios, but your point is well made. You can follow a calculation, a basal metabolic index, BMI, and end up upside down, to take a complicated subject and reduce it to a moment. And we deserve and can get today a subset of tests that are evidence-based, that are that discriminate at the individual level, and that we know the difference between, say, 4 and 8, or 4, 8, and 12.
Right.
Recognizing that we will always have a deeper level. Quantum mechanics kind of shook up mechanistic physics, and it's still paradoxic. It still doesn't make a lot of logical sense, but it's quite predictive.
Between you and me, you're right. I agree. What's happening inside the atom is kind of outside my world.
Well, see, there are more worlds for us to continue to explore. And it turns out that resonance, electron resonance in long chain unsaturated fats, is something that some people feel is significant. We've covered a goodly amount of science and practice. If you look forward 2, 3, 4 years, and primary prevention, the proactive, predictive, personalized practice protocols, including Omega Quant, become the new standard, in the way that when I was a young pathologist, every test was done individually, and then a company called Technicon developed this multi-channel analyzer called the SMAC. And today we have profiles that pretty much emulate what the SMAC machine did in the mid-70s.
That's right. I remember those things. Wow.
We inherited the second SMAC machine in the world.
Wow.
Nate Gotchman, who was very close to the Technicon people, Jack Whitehead and others, went out to San Diego to have a brilliant career there. And I inherited his desk.
Wow.
And therefore I inherited the machine that went with the desk. And at that time it still to some extent does, but at that time it had what's called Tygon tubing, this very small bore, little flow rate plastic tubing. And if any one of those hundreds or thousands of tubes pops off, the whole machine gets into a tizzy. So we want to know what to do. You've given us clarity that our diet should include probably more omega-3.
Yep.
But we want to be concerned not about total, but about active fats of the omega-3 and omega-6 flavor or type. So that eating cold water, line caught, less contaminated fish, especially if I remember the collar of the fish is the fattiest part of the fish.
Well, it depends on the fish, but I mean, it's actually under the skin is where most of the fat is, although it's obviously anyway. Salmon's good.
But that gets to the makeover of our kitchen. Because I've learned from colleagues who study things like toxic metals like mercury, that if you're going to have a provocative test to see if you have too much, say, mercury, lead, cadmium, arsenic at the moment, you don't want to have fish, chicken, or rice within a week because of the arsenic and the mercury. Within a week.
A week?
Because of the traffic. Because if you're measuring the traffic of what's just going through and you don't know how much sulfur and other how much detoxifying capacity you have, the traffic is not what you need to know. The tissue is what you need to know about. Yeah. So again, we come up with measurements that have long been done, that when you look at them carefully, have very limited predictive significance, and measurements that can be done that I think deserve to be first line part of personalized comprehensive care, including omega quant.
Yeah.
Which, as you know, is why we've included it in our predictive biomarker set,
Yeah.
for exactly the reasons you so clearly and in such a straightforward way informed us about.
Yeah.
That this is not just a test hot off the presses, first publication, if you like something new and so forth. Okay. No, this is a test that has been very carefully vetted from multiple intellectual, etc., points of view. And I don't know if you saw it, but we have a question about which fish. So can you make a recommendation of which fish for those of us who want to have a fish?
Who want to have a fish? I mean, the go-to, of course, is salmon. And of course, then we get into the wild or farmed and all that. I think if we
wait. No, excuse me. I need to stop you.
Well,
do you think a farmed fish has any nutritional comparison or an analogy to a wild caught fish?
well, I mean, it's not black and white. They certainly have as much. At least the evidence I've seen is that farm salmon
Right.
have about as much omega-3 EPA DHA per serving as wild, but that doesn't mean that's everything in the fish. I mean, there's also more fat. And part of the reason is there's more fat in the farmed animal because they aren't. They're just
Well,
in
when
a
you
cage.
get into what those farmed fish are fed,
Right.
there's a lot in the broad category called schmutz, which I'll translate as what you want not.
What you want.
Another subject for another time. But most fish in a restaurant, most fish when you're traveling, probably was farmed.
Probably.
And my view is you should take some increase in your natural detoxifying sulfur molecules like garlic, ginger, onions, brassica sprouts, and eggs, or other ways of getting the small amounts, but amounts that can accumulate over time to be significant, of these contaminants, so that you get the benefit, the fat benefit, the nutritional benefit. I was taught that fish were brain food. Now people tell me that fish are poison. The poor fish, it got me.
They can't win. They can't win.
Right. Well, they have a bad PR department.
They do. They can't get it straight. Yeah. I mean, I think the day will come where we will not be, at least for the omega-3 world, and I am so fortunately and unfortunately focused on EPA and DHA. We will be either producing it from algae, single-celled organisms.
Well, then you get DHA. My understanding is then you get DHA, but not EPA.
There are strains that produce EPA.
Really?
There are algal EPAs. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But there are also land plants that have been, again, we're
Like
talking about
purslane.
genetic modification.
Well, no, purslane.
Well, that's ALA, but we're talking about EPA and DHA, where some land plants will be able to produce EPA and DHA because of gene manipulation.
Right.
And we'll be able to grow all the omega-3 we want without catching a single fish. I mean, I think that is the future. It's just got to be, of course, it's supply and demand, and we got to get bigger capacity to produce these oils. But from an omega-3 EPA.
Now we make a couple of points in that regard. One, we think the fish oil should be distilled under nitrogen, both to concentrate the EPA DHA and to get some of those quote schmutz factors out.
Yes, right. And they almost everybody does that. I mean, just to get the bad taste out, you've got to go through some of these. There's like 7 to 8 different steps, they do to go from raw fish oil to the stuff that's even the basic stuff in the grocery store. And then of course you can get much cleaner with other steps as well.
There are several fish oils that have been approved by FDA, I think for hypertriglyceridemia particularly, Any assessment of them? Are they better than the supplements? Are they equivalent to the best of the supplements? Can you help us with that issue?
Yeah, there are two principal ones that are available right now. One's called Lovesa, which is EPA plus DHA. And it's ethyl ester form, and they make it in ethyl ester form so it can be more concentrated. So the pills aren't this big, they're this big. And the other one is called Vasipa, which is advertising on the 6 o'clock news. And that's just EPA ethyl esters only, no DHA. And the Lovesa was the first long ago to be approved for treating high triglycerides, as you suggest. And I mean very high triglycerides, 500 to 1,000. It's very good for that. It's never actually been properly tested directly for reducing cardiovascular risk. There was on the other hand, the EPA product called Vasipa was tested for reducing risk for cardiovascular events, and it was spectacularly effective. This was about 2 years ago, and the study was called Reduce It. But if you take patients at high risk for cardiovascular events, high triglycerides, low HDL, a history of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, these kind of things, and you give them 4 grams a day, and we're talking about 4 grams a day. So this is not the 1 capsule a day study. This is a big dose. They found about a 25% reduction in every cardiovascular endpoint they could find for giving the Vasipa, the EPA product. So right now, the best evidence for cardiovascular protection and really total mortality was reduced. Is for the EPA product. It's not to say an EPA plus DHA doesn't do it. It just hasn't been tested.
Right.
Well.
What we reduce that issue to is EPA and DHA. EPA for body and brain, DHA for brain and body. You need both. Don't try to fool Mother Nature. She doesn't She doesn't like to be fooled.
Because they come together in fish. That's the natural source, right?
And yes, and in, if you will, and in a balanced lifestyle. Yeah.
Whatever that is.
Whatever, yes. I was just going to say, when you find a cohort of those people, we'll study them too.
Yeah, let us know. Yeah.
Okay, so looking forward, as these kinds of functional tests become more widely understood and applied, and interpreted to their best outcome value, including lifestyle, activity, attitude, diet, hydration combinations, where do you think the most opportunity lies at the moment? If you could design a study that would bring together several of the points you so elegantly laid out, what would that look like? Is that underway? I think you understand the broadness of the question, and I'll let you take it any direction that makes sense to you.
Yeah. Well, harping back to something you said early in the discussion, you got 10 different biomarkers that you can measure individually. I mean, you don't have to worry about genes. Let's just talk about biomarkers like omega-3 levels, like homocysteine, like what was it? I can't remember the other one. Vitamin D is, of course, an important.
Right, vitamin D, or hemoglobin A1C.
A1C, right. If you can put all those together in one package and produce a fingerprint,
right,
a predictive fingerprint,
right,
that would that I don't know if anybody's doing. I mean, it's theoretically doable.
It's a paradigm shift.
Yeah,
but stay tuned because it's happening.
Yeah, and it's good. I'm glad to hear it's happening. But I think this is going to happen mostly in the not in the mass insurance, mass medical space. It's going to happen individuals who want to take care, who want to control their own health. Right. And more of these finger stick type tests are available. You don't have to go to a doctor. They're very understandable. Right. They're not a high risk. I mean, you're not going to scare anybody to death if you tell them they've got an out of whack level. For the omega-3, it's very simple. Just eat more omega-3. Nobody's not putting anybody at risk with that. nutritional status markers, I think, are the future of those is going to be in personalized medicine. Or maybe even, I mean, what I'm hoping is in the life insurance world. If you can imagine
the actuaries, the people
actuaries,
who
right?
know
They should care.
who know their math, they do care. They do care. There's the American Council on Life Insurance. Then there's the Health Insurance Association of America. And a subset of those people are actuaries.
Yeah.
And they are at the moment terrified that the costs are going up and the value of conventional care is going down, to the point where what my grandmother used to say, the rents are going up and the ceilings are coming down. Now, translating from actuarial prowess and interpretation of the math, which the National Center for Health Statistics does and did brilliantly under Kerr White. I don't know who's running it now. We can add substantial quality of life at very low cost to most people if they are willing to take yes for an answer. Now, the yes here is, are you willing to change some of your habits you learned from family or however you learn them?
Right.
But to simplify a complicated subject, let's say you're right-handed and therefore you brush your teeth, because I hope you take care of your teeth and brush them with your right hand. Try brushing your teeth with your left hand. It will feel very odd for a short period of time. If you persist, you will gain the capacity by transferring from one. Okay. A lot of us need a makeover in our kitchen, in our bedroom, in our personal care, in our school, home, or places we spend time. The quality of relationship, the quality of the environment, the quality of everything from the toxins you can avoid just by taking your shoes and clothes off when you come home and slipping into something more comfortable. We have opportunities galore to deal with crises that are ever more present with us, and they're now overlapping. The lack of certain essential nutrients is altering the thiamine in the ocean, which is altering the krill, which is altering everything. Oh my Lord. Really?
Lack of thiamine?
I couldn't make this stuff up. I could not.
You couldn't make that up.
No, I'm not a good fiction writer, you know. So it's like Charles Dickens is writing this part of the scenario. It's the best of times, it's the worst of times. We have more opportunity to save our own lives. And I want to come back to a point I think you made that I completely agree with. I think consumer-driven health, I think consumers will drive this transition. People who say, well, it's a few $100s for a suite of tests that can add quality to my life, that can add decades in some cases, that can reverse what seems like a potential problem. You know, weight management, diabetes, cardiovascular, they're all one big lump from my point of view.
No, you're right.
And then we get into too much bad and not enough good, either in the diet or in the relationship. And what do you do about that? So it is about weaving a healthy fabric of life through guidance. Yeah. And I think what guides are tests that have a meaning, that have a predictive significance in that Galen and Gambino beyond normality sense.
Yeah.
I think the laboratory people are eager and ready. I think they know some of the limitations, but it's like, if you don't ask me, I don't have to talk about it. Because after you talk about it, the next question is, so what is the test that replaces the test that we've been doing, but it doesn't have much meaning anymore, or it didn't have any meaning to begin with, we just thought it did.
Yeah, right.
Yes, if you ask regulatory systems or payor systems to lead, then you have ignored history.
Yeah.
They have always responded. They have never led. If consumers fill the waiting room of professionals, health coaches, and other professionals that understand how to add quality through these kinds of tests and guidance. The future is
Yeah.
very bright.
I think so.
In
I
fact,
think
we
so.
think you can even fund the transition out of that $1 out of $3 that are currently, quote, wasted. That's $1 trillion a year. If you devoted that to primary prevention, you could do a lot of omega quant tests.
Oh, well, we could, right? But the primary prevention is absolutely, those are the key words, absolutely. And Americans are, well, people are just not used to preventing. They're used to treating.
Well, we had that fascination roughly from 1950 to the turn of the millennium about magic bullets and external causation and patch me up and send me back.
Yeah.
I don't have to participate or take responsibility.
No, just take a drug. Right.
Yes, a pill-based or a procedure-based solution. And now we know better. But what are we going to do to speed the transition to a full healthcare system, not just the absence of symptoms?
Mm-hmm.
What are we going to do to fulfill the promise of help ever, harm never? First of all, do no harm.
Yeah, right.
And it is a makeover, but first we have to start, and from my point of view, first we have to start with a look as candid as possible at the evidence and the science, and then see what that leads us to do. As you said in the beginning, the data pulled you forward and continues to. So I do think that we can speed a transition from the current sick care system to a healthful caring system. It is mostly about lifestyle, epigenetics, and primary prevention. That priority needs to be not just on our lips, it needs to be in our budgets.
Yeah, right. Totally.
Anything in addition that you would like our folks to know about you, your work, or what gets you up in the morning and so forth?
Well, what gets me up nowadays, I founded Omega Quant Laboratory, back in 2009. And it's grown and done very, very well. We've been doing fine, but my love is not business by any means. It's research. And so in the October of last year of 2020, I formed a nonprofit called, just cleverly, the Fatty Acid Research Institute.
Oh, good.
So I now have sort of left Omega Quant I'm physically in the same building,
Right.
but mentally I'm out of the business side, and I have a young CEO and my daughter who is PhD RD. Christina Jackson. She is also working very hard in the business now, and
Great.
So I'm free to do research. So I am committed to just polluting the literature with omega-3, fatty acid related health metrics. What do we learn about health from fatty acid patterns? So we're doing studies like the one I mentioned. It's fun.
Terrific. I can see why Patty Doyster and others hold you in such high regard.
No, you're kind. You're very kind. Thank you.